So, this morning, I'm going to be talking to you about Joshua chapter 4. So if you want to go ahead and turn there, you can. And then I want you to take a second and set that aside. I'm always happy when John gives me an opportunity that I can preach. But I will tell you that Memorial Day is the hardest for me. As a matter of fact, in preparing this message alone in my office, in my basement, many of you guys have seen that because I also have virtual reality set up down there, right? But in my office alone yesterday was very difficult, and many times I began to cry. What we're going to talk about today is specifically why do you see graphics like this Memorial Day? Remember and honor. Remember and honor. You guys, just by a show of hands, how many people have seen graphics like this where they say, remember and honor? Right? Yeah, we see it all the time. And I saw, as I was praying to, and asking God, I was like, Lord, what would you have me to speak about this Sunday, this Memorial Day? And everywhere I looked, I began to see these signs, right? Outside stores, everywhere I went, remember and honor, remember and honor. And so I was like, okay, I guess I hear your voice loud and clear, right? Because I'm seeing it everywhere I go. And so God put this into my head, this theme of remember and honor. And everywhere I looked, I either saw evidence of remember and honor, because you see it like the news, puts on various, information about what's happening for Memorial Day here, or what people are doing to remember there, or sometimes, it's glaringly obvious when the opposite is there, right? When people are not remembering and they're not honoring. But everywhere I looked, once I saw these signs, everywhere I looked, I was seeing either people remembering and honoring, or I was seeing the lack of people remembering and honoring. But it brought to my mind this question: is it important for us to remember and honor? I see, a lot of people are like, yes, sure. Okay. Do we know why? I mean, they tell us we should remember and honor. Is this something that we should do? Is society saying, you should remember and you should honor? This is what we do. It's Memorial Day. But let's ask ourselves seriously, is it important for us to remember and honor? And see, it was in that moment that God made me stop and remember and honor. And I, in my time serving in the Marines, and I know that Stuart probably saw these things too, and probably George, and I imagine absolutely Jerry, even if you weren't a Marine, you probably saw some of the silly things that Marines did that were mostly associated with traditions and things like that, right? And one of the things that we did was called a mess night. Stuart, did you ever go to a mess night? No? So we had this thing called a mess night, and you would dress up in your dress uniform, ribbons and medals. It was extremely formal. As a matter of fact, it was so formal that beforehand, Marines were already told things that they had to say, and they had to memorize them verbatim, right? Of how the process would everything. There was even a song that is played when the chief of the mess says, bring forth the beef, right? And then there is a drum and a fife that accompanies the beef for the feast, right? And there is a tune that they play as they march out and escort the meat to the table. And there's a lot of rules that you have to actually that you have to know and practice. As a matter of fact, it's so formal that what we would have to do is, as a platoon, we would come together, right? Because it would actually usually be at a company size. So you're talking, several platoons here. They would come together and we would actually do practices. How to eat, how to walk, how to communicate, things you would have to say if you were going to ask for permission for things, right? If a person's glass was empty, you're not permitted to fill it yourself. Somebody else has to fill it for you. All these rules, such formality. But one of the things that we did on mess night was there was a point in time where between the main meal and the dessert, where they would begin to propose toast, right? And they would talk about, and they would have to memorize the lines of those that they would honor. And they would say, to the men who fought in the Revolutionary War, to the Marines who fought in the Civil War, to the Marines who fought in Vietnam, to the Marines who fought in Korea, to the Marines who fought in World War I and II, and all the way through to even, more recently, Afghanistan. And they would name the battles that the Marines fought in after they said the name of the war or the action. And they would name the battles. They would have to memorize all of that. And they would go one at a time, the Marines going around the table. And they would identify them all. The thing is, when you get to the toast of the war or the action that you were a part of, you sit. And the men that are there, that were not there, continue. And you can see it in that moment. The men that are sitting, you see it in their faces because they all know somebody they lost. And in that moment, they're thinking about who they lost. And they're thinking about the time that they lost them. They're thinking about that person and how they got to know them. And they will never know them again. And it's difficult. And you can feel the silence between each and every one of those. And as I was sitting there, and I was thinking about mess night, and I was thinking, going through my mind and recalling each step and everything that they would do, I even remembered that there was a table that would be set off to the side for the fallen. And there was rules about that too, right? You couldn't walk between the table of the fallen and the actual meal table. If you had to walk that direction, you would have to walk out and you would go around that table and continue in that direction. And on that table would be a POW MIA flag. There would be an American flag, sometimes a Marine Corps flag. There would be an officer's sword and an enlisted man's sword. There would be a blue dress cover. And there would be dog tags sitting on the plate, an empty plate in a place setting. The empty dog tags represented all of those that we had lost. But it also represented going forward all those that we might know that we might lose, because any one of our names could be on that next set. And it was a reminder of that, where we had been and where we are going. A lot of thoughts and memories. And It's a no wonder that they would keep this so formal of an evening because of so many that you were honoring through these actions, right? But as I was going through that in my mind, God put Joshua 4 in the forefront of my mind. And then I thought, remembering and honoring again. And the question came to mind is, whom will I remember and who will I honor? And I want to ask you this question. I want to ask you, who will you choose to remember and who will you choose to honor? The thing is, and I want to define some of these things, right, so that we fully understand. I know we all think, when we remember and honor, and I understand these things, right? But let me explain this to you. And I want to bring these words to the forefront. And I want to share with you what it means to remember and honor in the context of what we're going to talk about today. Remembering is something you do internally. When we remember, we recall an associated initiating event, or we purposefully bring something to mind. Like, I was sitting at my desk, as a matter of fact, at work on Thursday, and I saw a picture of Casey and Logan sit on my desk, and they're dressed as gangsters in this picture. And it's my favorite picture. And I look over at this photograph, and it's my favorite picture because not just do they look so adorable dressed up as gangsters. I'm glad they're not gangsters, but dressed up as gangsters like from the 50s, one of them is holding a fake Tommy gun, and the other one's holding like a shotgun or something like that, and they're dressed there and they're standing, and they got this stern look on their face and everything, and I'm like, that's my boys, And I'm looking at this photograph, and the warmest remembrance I have is when they gave me those photos. And Jen told me, she said they were at King's Dominion, right? When they have those photos, you can dress up and everything else there. They were at King's Dominion, and they said, we want to do this. We want to take this picture for Dad. This will be great. He'll love this. They wanted to do that for me. And that thought that they wanted to have a picture of them to give to me so that I would think of them, right? And they did it because they loved me is something that just like, I just can't forget. Every time I look at that photograph, I can't help but remember all of those things come flooding back into me, right? And I keep that photograph on my desk because, you never know. Some things can get difficult and they can get tough, and then you look at photographs like that, right? The other thing I keep on my desk, by the way, is all my previous identifications that I got when I was cruising with Jennifer. So there's that, and that helps too, right? So I look at that picture, and I think, it brings back those happy memories, and I remember, right? That's what I'm talking about. It's initiated either by a triggering event or something you see or hear, right? Or it's something that you sit and you think about, and you purposefully bring that thing to mind. But when we honor, we demonstrate a behavior or condition of being that requires actions. When we honor, we demonstrate a behavior or condition of being that requires action. We don't just say, I honor him, right? But we explain how. Like this past year, when my dad passed away and I spoke at his funeral, I honored my father by speaking about how he served in churches, how he was an assistant pastor, and he pastored a church for a while, and then how what he did as a father that was so meaningful. And I talked about those things to honor him specifically. It didn't just have to be a thought that I had internally, but it was something that I wanted to tell everybody about so that they would know about my father. I talked about his service. He was in the Navy. And I talked about his service in the Navy. And I did all of that to honor him. As a matter of fact, honoring is, when we honor somebody, it's because they have done something that is like a little bit above and beyond, right? I mean, we don't say, oh, my kid made the average roll today. That's wonderful, right? No, our children made the honor roll today because they did way above this average, and they excelled, and they demonstrated that they were dedicated to something to that point. They made the honor roll, not the average roll. I don't know as if I ever did that, but... So that's what we do when we honor, right? The third thing I want to identify is memorial. A memorial is something that initiates a reminder of a significant person or an event. And we can do that in many ways, right? We can do it like when groups make efforts, right? You see, I've got up here pictures of various memorials, like the World War II Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, the Vietnam Wall, to name a few that are famous, right? And then I have representation from the Revolutionary War. And you think about these things, and we honor those that fought in those wars. And we build these memorials so that we can remember, so that we know who these people were and what they did, what they sacrificed. And that's what I say, memorial. That's what I'm talking about, right? The memorial triggers those memories. It creates opportunities where we can honor those that committed so much to achieving that. And by the way, I had this thought actually too when I was sitting over here just a little bit ago, and I had this thought, and I was like, imagine this, right? And I know that we have all seen a lot of like World War II movies and things like that. We see some of these war movies, and you think about, when it shows that some of them are killed in action, and some of them knowingly charging into the face of the enemy, not likely believing that they will even survive that. But think about the level of dedication and sacrifice that they're willing to commit to do that. All the ideas that they have. I know you guys probably all have ideas, right? What do I want to do, this next year? I always have ideas of things that I want to do and accomplish. And it's not just the ideas, it's your thoughts. It's everything that makes up you and all the people that you influence. And in that moment, they are willing to sacrifice all of that, all that makes up them, to make that charge, right? They're willing to sacrifice themselves and everything that makes up who they are. They're that dedicated to accomplishing this, right? And so we think about the groups of people, right? But then we also think about the individuals. And when I say individuals, I'm talking down at the individual level. We're talking about our family members, our friends, spouses, children, parents. About what they lose. We have these memorials, these big memorials for the groups, and then these smaller memorials, which are basically gravestones. And all of those gravestones, they all have one thing in common. I had a friend, actually, who wrote a poem that's called The Dash. And it's referring to the dash, right, between the year you were born and the year you died. And that dash is just a line, but it represents everything in that person's life. What does a dash really mean? And if you didn't know the person, you wouldn't know what it means. You guys have probably seen gravestones of people that you've never seen before or met before in your entire life. And you look at the day that they were born and the day that they were passed, and between there is a dash, and we don't think anything of it. We just say, oh, they lived from this time to this time, and this is about how old they were when they passed. We don't have any idea really what that dash means. But it meant something to somebody, right? So when we think about memorials, it is the large memorial that we have that represents the group of people and the effort that they made and the sacrifices collectively And then we have our individual memorials, our gravestones, or other things that we have, plaques, all kinds of things like that, right? Of how we create the opportunity for memories or to talk about those things. And now that we've talked about that, we've talked about memorials, we've talked about honor, and we've talked about remembering. Now, I want you to turn to Joshua chapter 4. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information as we get ready to talk about Joshua chapter 4. See, in Joshua chapter 4, it's talking about when the Israelites, as a matter of fact, I even have a graphic right here that you can see. It shows you what did the Israelites do, And in their time in captivity, of course, they were in Egypt here, right? And then what we saw is they ended up over here in the Promised Land. And I think to myself, wouldn't it have been great to just take a straight line? I mean, what happened with all of this? I mean, literally, when the Bible says they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, clearly they were wandering, right? Interesting. But we see that over here we have the Red Sea, where God parted the Red Seas for them to cross on dry land, right? Did you know that he actually parted waters twice? He parted the waters twice, not just in the Red Sea, but our story is about up here, and it's about these stones right here. They're referred to today as the memorial stones. But let's go ahead and read how that came to be. If you follow along with me, I'm reading, by the way, from New King James Version, and I'm going to put these reading glasses on because I have to, quite frankly. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight." Then Joshua called the 12 men, whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. And this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, What do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and it crossed over the Jordan. The waters of Jordan were cut off. And these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever." Did I miss a line there? Okay. And the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. So the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people hurried and crossed over. Then it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. And the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all of Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. Then the Lord spake to Joshua, saying, "Command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan." Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, "Come up from the Jordan." And it came to pass, when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet touched the dry land, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, "When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, 'What are these stones?' then you shall let your children know, saying, 'Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land.' For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. And the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over, that all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever." You may fear the Lord your God forever. I want you to think about this for a second. He crosses over the Jordan River, and in these scriptures, it tells us that, in fact, because the Jordan there are droughts and things like that in the region, but it tells you that the Jordan was actually overflowing its banks. So it had to have been the rainy season, right? It was full. It's not like it was the dry season, where scholars could argue, God didn't really part those waters. As a matter of fact, no, the record shows that the water had overflowed the banks before they crossed, and it so did after they crossed when the Lord allowed that area to close again. So he parted those waters and allowed them to cross on dry land across the Jordan there. And as they're crossing, he says, they get together these stones where the priests stood. They were where the water was going to be. And he set those stones into place. Because, like I said, there are a lot of seasons that there are drought in the Jordan River. I've been to the Jordan River, exactly where the country of Jordan and Israel separate along the border. And you can see a lot of times, when I was there, it wasn't during a heavy time of drought, but yet they had experienced some drought. And so you could see where the water line once was and where it was currently at that time. And it is. It actually goes up and down quite a bit, significantly. But I could also tell that if you were to take some very large stones and you were to put them in the middle of that, when the droughts did come, you would see them. They would stick up out of the water. Then they picked up 12 more stones, right? They cross over and they go into Gilgal. And there Joshua had them come up and set up 12 stones as a memorial. And I think this is so important because I want you to follow this, right? In this story, Joshua identifies that they will be a memorial. They will be something that will be the visual reminder of what God has done. We will remember what he did, and we will honor God for what he has done. So my next question came. Why? Why do we have to have a memorial? Why do we have to remember, and why do we have to honor? And see, he says this actually, I want you to go back in verses 20 to 22, and I want you to follow along with me as I read these verses. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God, and he goes on to tell them. It's not just that we honor God, but that we're going to tell people. It requires us to tell that next generation. Have you not noticed? We struggle in today's society because there's not enough parents, there's not enough people that pass down to the next generation, to those children, the sacrifices that were made, the things that God did for us. We talk about Memorial Day and we think about those that we have served with that have been lost, and we don't let those memories be tarnished or forgotten because of the sacrifices they made for us to remain free. But we forget. And we don't talk about the stories of what God has done. And we even saw it even before this in Israel. Because as they're going through the desert, marching over that huge, vast area of the desert for 40 years, how many times did they forget? And they began to worship other things. How important is it for us to have a memorial? How important is it for us to remember? How important is it for us to honor? And make sure that God doesn't die to those here that he needs to be alive to because of us. Because we know the story, because we know the truth. We know what he did for us that they don't know, but we don't tell them. And now we live in generations where you can ask people if they believe in God and they don't even know what that really means. Because nobody even told them. Some years ago, one friend that I had lost, his name was John Breckel. And about 5 years after Breckel passed, I finally got the courage and I looked up his parents. And he lived in Florida, and I called them. And I told them that I knew John well, that we had served together. And I shared with them some stories about John. What I didn't know is that, and I don't know why I didn't know this. I don't know if he told me, I just don't remember. But he had a 2-year-old little girl at the time that he passed. And when I talked to his parents, they asked if they could record me telling these stories because I wasn't the only one that served with John that called them. And they said, we want her to know her dad. We want her to know something about him. Can you imagine going through your life not knowing your father? I can't because I've never had that. I've known my father well. But even so much more blessed is the fact that I know my Heavenly Father. When we don't honor, when we don't remember, when we fail to see how he has blessed every one of us and only see how our lives have gone the way we wanted them to go, we don't see his presence. And then we don't get to remember it. We don't get to honor it. And I think about all the things that I could think of that are memorials in my life that are blessings. Think about the things in your life that every time you see them, it makes you appreciate how God has blessed you. Those are your memorials. They're there so that you can remember and that you can honor. That's why they exist. I want to just take a few minutes. I want to give you a few minutes of silence. And if you'll stand with me, I want to just take a moment of 1 minute of silence. And I want you to remember. I want you to think about how God has blessed you individually. About the things in your life that you could look at and say, these are my memorials. These are the things that I look at and go, I remember, God, when you were there. And I will honor you by telling others about how you have blessed me. I will honor you for how you have saved me. I want to thank you for coming today, and I hope that as we go forward tomorrow, that we really think about what it means to remember, to honor, and what memorials really are. John, like to come forward and send us on our way.